Good morning, Garland Nixon here, and Scott Ritter is with us again. We're very fortunate to have him to do another Wednesday morning talk on all things Ukraine and U.S. foreign policy. Let's talk. Hi, Garland and Scott here. Just to remind people, my my other platform that I use, just in case they toss me off of YouTube, which could happen on any given day. And also, it's a non-censorship. It's a free speech platform. Is Rockfin, ROKFIN, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Rockfin does not do any advertisements. They don't charge you anything. It's free and no censorship. So please go over there and become a member. If you choose, you can become a subscriber. A subscriber is $14.99 a month, and a subscriber gets it's like 12 something if you join up for a year, because they don't charge because they don't charge you for a couple of months at any rate. So Rockfin's great. And as I said, you can just become a member if you can't afford it. Doesn't cost you a dime, no advertisements, no anything. You'll enjoy Rockfin, no censorship. And so I do this show for my subscription members. I do one show each week with Scott Ritter from 9 to 10 on Wednesday, ideally. Sometimes it has to be a little different. And we do an hour, and we start off on all platforms. All right, Scott, we got lots to talk about. Before we get to the stuff that I got, what do you think is the big story of the week that we should be looking at for the Ukraine conflict?
Well, I mean, the NATO summit, everything that's happening right now on the ground in Ukraine relates to shaping perceptions, shaping the agenda of the NATO summit. And I think we can see the first indication that NATO is in a state of disarray is that they were unable to find a new NATO Secretary General to replace Stoltenberg. So he's been extended for a year. Apparently, the British wanted Ben Wallace and the Americans wanted Ursula, and they couldn't come to an agreement. So, and because NATO is a consensus-driven organization, they went to the default. And you have to ask yourself, why couldn't they come to an agreement? I thought NATO was, has never been more unified than it is today. But the fact is, NATO is a dysfunctional organization that has invested heavily in the war in Ukraine, and the war is going badly, very badly for NATO. And I think you're going to be seeing a NATO summit that was supposed to be sort of a victory celebration of the great counteroffensive, putting Russia back on its heels, using this to create momentum to achieve a strategic defeat of Russia. And instead, NATO is going to be gathering together, confused about its future, scared about its future, uncertain about its future. And there's no person better to lead a scared, uncertain, nervous alliance than Jan Stoltenberg, because he personifies scared, nervous, uncertain.
I discovered when I went into law enforcement, after a couple of years in law enforcement, I discovered something very important. I didn't even realize this. The people that try to act the toughest are the weakest. The people that try to act, I'm bad, I'm this, they're the weakest people. And the people, the really, really tough people, just kind of quiet. They don't bother anybody, but you don't want to screw with them. You know what I mean? And I found that the mouthiest ones, and Stoltenberg is one of the mouthiest ones. And I guess that's why they wanted von der Leyen, because these are people that I don't care what's happening. Everything could be crashing around them. They're going to stick to the narrative. And it seems to me that the Biden people, the neocons, they're not about. Sometimes it doesn't even seem like they care what's happening on the battlefield. All they're trying to do is maintain a narrative.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at Ursula. When she was the defense minister of Germany, she destroyed the German military. There's a reason why Germany can't put multiple brigades in the field today, and that's because Ursula. There's a reason why they can't produce new equipment. It's because of Ursula. She really is horrible. The only thing she's good at is parroting American policy positions. She's extraordinarily adept at being the loyal servant, and that's what she is, a loyal servant of America. And that's why we want her. We want somebody who will say, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. Ben Wallace, I know why the British want. Look, the British have been very aggressive in terms of their support for Ukraine, and Ben Wallace personifies this aggression. The problem is Britain's got nothing. They got no game. This is would be the equivalent of me trying to join the NBA, and he said, "Well, Scott, it's old man appreciation. So, yeah, come on in, dress up, sit at the end of the bench, and maybe second half, if we're up 400 points, we might put you in." And for me to get in there in the first quarter going, "Hey, block him out. What's your problem? Get a pick, hustle, hustle, hustle." They're going to be looking at you going, "Dude, you really don't get to do this because you're not really a factor in this." And Ben Wallace is the equivalent of that, the old white dude who's been allowed to dress up and sitting at the end of the bench, trying to pretend he's a player. England has no military. Let's just be straight up on that. And NATO is a military alliance. So, would we? Why would anybody want to have Ben Wallace, who is just a mouthpiece of an empty, literally he's the mouthpiece of an empty suit, because that's all the British military today is an empty suit. Not a good look. So I think the United States would prefer to have somebody who's totally subservient to America without confusing the picture by making people believe that this is somehow the resurrection of Great Britain, the global power. Great Britain's a joke militarily. Literally, they've got nothing. I've said it before. I'll say it again. You can put the entire British Army into any major soccer stadium in Europe today, and you'll have 30,000 unsold seats.
Scott, something I said recently, a couple weeks back, I looked at it, and you probably heard me say it. If you play chess and you're looking at the board and everybody looks at it and you say, in 3 moves, this checkmate, there's no way around it. You just wipe the board clean and start. When it gets to the point that the end is certain, the game is over. All right, I'm not very good, but I played before, and more often than not, I'm the one looking at checkmate. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble in 3 moves. Yeah, Garland, let's start again. You've just lost 10 in a row. Let's go for 11, right? When I look at the battlefield and I see, dragons' teeth, mines, you name it. I see Russia in the areas that they've taken. I see these, impenetrable, elements of protection. When I look at what's happening with Ukraine, they're still begging for equipment. They're throwing a few guys in it. They get blown up. When I see the condition of Ukraine, I look at it and I say, well, it's over. Russia has taken a lot of stuff. They're sitting there. Ukraine can't possibly penetrate their defenses, and they're just sitting there picking off stuff, blowing, bombing, artillery. It's over. They're just sitting there, and now Ukraine's like, yeah, we got to do another. We got to go get more people. But the ones that you have are dead, and they're not well trained. And now it's like, oh, we'll send F-16s. Is it over? It seems like it's over to me. Where did they go from here? Going into NATO, also add this, with the discussion coming into NATO, with anybody with half a brain looking at this, you're a military guy. You can tell me, I'm looking at the battlefield situation saying this damn fight is over. At any rate, go ahead.
Yeah, if we're playing chess, it's over. 3 moves, it's done. You're 100% correct. My concern is that NATO may say, well, we ain't playing chess anymore. And seek to do it because they are desperate. Let's be clear what's at stake here. The survival of NATO, the viability of NATO. NATO is a viable institution going forward. Let's also remember what's happening this week. In France, there are serious, there's serious unrest. And France, of course, is the storming of the Bastille in July, what was it, 1789? was supposed to be the birthplace of modern democracy. I mean, there it is. The people, liberty, equality, and all this good stuff. France, a member of NATO that espouses civilian control of the military, that would never tolerate the notion of supporting a coup d'état in a democratic society. Right now, there's talk of a coup d'état in France. I don't think it's going to happen, but things have gotten so bad that people are saying maybe it's time for the military to step in. Europe's busted. Europe's broke. Hopefully they can fix it. I'm not betting against France. I'm betting for France. I've been to Paris. I've been to France. I've traveled extensively. I've worked with them. I respect them. I want nothing but good things to happen to France. But what I want and what's happened are two totally different things. And bad things are happening to France. And, bad things are happening to Europe. Germany is in the process of deindustrialization. That's not me saying, it's a major German think tank saying, gosh, things have gotten so bad, we are actually deindustrializing. Germany, which was the industrial heartland of Europe, is deindustrializing. Basically, Europe is falling apart. And, Europe is the foundation of NATO. That is what makes NATO NATO. And so we have to be realistic about what NATO expects. These nations have spent the last 70, 80 years married to an ideal that's no longer viable. And how do you walk away from that, especially when nobody has identified an alternative? Europe's scared right now, frightened. They don't know what's their future is. And all they know is NATO. And so this NATO summit is going to be a gathering of frightened nations, desperate for some miracle outcome that changes what appears to be their destiny, which is they bet everything on the Ukrainian horse, and we're coming down on the last furlongs, and the Ukrainian horse is lying down on the field with 3 broken legs. It ain't going to win. So, we talked about this. I know I've talked about it. I thought maybe we mentioned it. Rasmussen, the former Secretary General of NATO, talking about creating a coalition of the willing that functions outside of the NATO framework, but consists of NATO nations. And you see what's happening. You see Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia coming together and talking about creating a force of intervention. You see Poland now having meetings with Zelensky about creating some sort of union that would create the political vehicle for a force of intervention to come in. It ain't chess anymore. It's something different. And will NATO go along with this? The Poles right now are talking about they want nuclear weapons. They want the U.S. to put the B-61 bombs on Polish soil. And everybody's saying that that's insane, and it is insane. But, a lot of people aren't picking up on something that happened in April of last year. Jessica Cox, who is the director of the NATO Nuclear Planning Directorate, came out and said, "Yeah, we've come together and we've decided that the F-35A is the beast. That's what we're getting. We have a 35 aircraft package that we're encouraging people to buy. You see, the Germans bought their 35. The Poles are buying their 35. The Finns are buying their 35. And what this is it's a nuclear strike package. And these are F-35A. They're nuclear capable planes. The Germans will transition from the Tornado to the F-35. You see other nations doing that as well. The Dutch are going to do that. The Belgians are going to do that. The Italians are going to do that. The Turks won't be allowed to do that because even though they were part of the F-35 joint development program, that's been terminated because they bought the S-400. So let's leave the Turks out of this for a second. But Poland has it. And in April of 2022, Cox said, what we need to do is look at how we integrate the F-35 capabilities of our non-nuclear partners, integrate them into the nuclear package, which means that while the nuclear weapons will continue to be stored in the existing facilities, there's the possibility that Polish F-35s could be positioned in Germany to carry nuclear weapons and participate in nuclear strikes against Russia. And this is something that also could come out of this NATO summit, the expansion of NATO's nuclear program, because they're angry about Russia's deployment of nuclear weapons into Belarus. The Poles are insisting that there has to be a face-saving mechanism that says, if you do that, we do this. And I think that that's going to be something that is going to be discussed in the NATO summit. We're going to see a summit of desperate nations desperately seeking a desperate solution to a desperate problem. I think the word to describe what's going to be happening in Vilnius is desperate. It's going to be a problem.
For the last year and a half, every other month, there was a pattern here. Every time things look crappy, they'd say, we've got, the M777s. Oh, we're getting them. There was always a new, it became obvious that there was a narrative. Things slumped down and we just name one of our weapons and say, that's going to fix it. Things slumped down, we name one of our weapons. Well, now, they're saying F-16s, they're saying this and that, but it seems to me that that whole thing is played out, that every weapon that is gone has basically, to me, I'll add this, has been discredited in a way that I can't imagine that other countries out there that buy US weapons are eyeing all of these things saying, oh yeah, I want that now, when like you put the Patriot out, you turn it on and an hour later it's turned to rubble. Your thoughts on all of the situation with all of the various weapons that have been used, exposed, whatever the case may be, and now where they are and trying to use that game. Hey, we're sending another weapon. This is going to turn the corner.
Well, I think the death of the Leopard has sent a shockwave across. But it should have been known beforehand. HIMARS was sold as the miracle weapon. If you recall, June of 2022, when it first employed, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine was just like, the game's over. We have the HIMARS. We're firing the HIMARS. And early on, they had some pretty impressive results. Why? Because the Russians hadn't configured themselves accordingly. When you have a system like the HIMARS, you don't want to concentrate ammunition altogether in a single depot within range of the HIMARS. You don't want to have command staffs consolidated in a single position. And the Ukrainians were getting hits. They were hitting artillery. They were hitting the ammunition storage, blowing it up. They were hitting command and control, blowing it up. They were hitting troop concentrations, blowing it up. But the Russians sat there and went, HIMARS, HIMARS, HIMARS. Okay, we got it. They put in their air defense. They started jamming the signal. And then they started dispersing. They said, well, we're going to disperse our ammunition. We're only going to bring forward that which we need for here. For the moment, where everything else is going to be on the range, scattered, command and control. We're going to have jump command posts. We're going to be doing this, that, and the other thing. We're not going to concentrate troops. We're going to bring them in, in more penny packets to avoid, the kind of targets that are used. HIMARS today is not a system that has a meaningful impact on the battlefield. It just doesn't. And I bring that up because people are like, ATACMS, ATACMS, ATACMS. ATACMS, of course, is the 300-mile range system, maybe more than 300, that the United States has been using for some time now. By the way, I just want to point that out. It's not a new system, so the Russians are familiar with it. You can bring in ATACMS and you can launch it. It's a ballistic missile. It will be shot down. It's not a magic weapon. The Russians have the most capable air defense systems in the world, and the ATACMS will have no impact on the battlefield. Yes, when it's first used, when anything's used for the first time, it's a novelty. There will be a dramatic strike somewhere. Something will go boom. Photos will be taken. Ukraine will be, doing backflips, saying the war's over. And then the next time the ATACMS fired, it gets shot down. And then next thing you know, the systems are being targeted. Yeah, you get Lancet, kamikaze drones taking it out. It's over. I mean, there's no magic F-16. I don't even know why we're talking about the F-16, because it'll have no impact on the battlefield. M1 tanks, the United States promised 30 to 50 of them. I think we're sort of reconsidering that right now because Leopards got slaughtered, and I think we don't want to have pictures of M1 tanks burning on the road, and that's exactly what will happen. Every M1 tank that's sent in there will be destroyed before it gets to the initial line of contact. There is no magic solution. Here's the other thing, too. All these weapons are great. I mean, we use them. They're not bad. But we also have some highly trained people using them. People that, we've recruited, we've trained. They have the capacity to learn. They've passed tests. They've exercised as a unit. They know how to use the equipment. They know how to maintain the equipment. And the Ukrainians don't. We're putting this technologically advanced equipment out there, and we're taking Ukrainian soldiers who just aren't up to the task. They don't have the skill set. We don't give them the time to learn. I'm not saying Ukrainians are incapable of learning. That's absurd. The Ukrainians are just like anybody else. If you bring them in and you put them at task and you train them adequately, they will perform well with the equipment they're trained on. They've proven that with Soviet era equipment that they've used. But it takes time. It takes a lot of time, and time is not something that Ukraine has right now. The 60,000 troops that were being, trained from October until June of this year that are now being sacrificed on the battlefield. When they're gone, there's nothing left. The Ukrainians are going into general mobilization now, scraping the bottom of the barrel, and they're not going to be given a year and a half to get trained up to be, competent. Notice I said competent. I didn't say to be really good, just competent, basic competency. Takes a year and a half. They're not going to have that. So you're going to have people who are inadequate. That's in the English word, it doesn't do the justification of how the Russians use it, because inadequate is more than just inadequate. It means you ain't any good. And the Ukrainians are inadequate when it comes to using the equipment that we've trained them on, and having, sound tactics on the battlefield. There's an interesting guy I follow on Telegram, Khodorkovsky. Mikhail Khodorkovsky is a guy who's been around since 2014, former Ukrainian, internal special forces guy who went over and fought with the ethnic Russians against the Ukrainian army. And he's now the commander of a volunteer unit, I think the Vostok battalion, and they're on the front lines. He writes about it. He said that two Ukrainian brigades that were handpicked to be trained by NATO to be in this fight have withdrawn, and he said that at least one of them is at 40%. That means they suffered 60% casualties. They're combat ineffective. 40%. Brigade is 3,000 to 5,000 people. So if it was a 50% casualty, we're looking at between 1,500 and 2,500 casualties. It's more than that because it's 60%. So we tack on that extra 10%. And that's just two brigades. There's other units that are getting eviscerated like this as well. The Ukrainians are being slaughtered on the battlefield. There's nothing that's going to happen to change this outcome. And then you brought it up, the concept, and I think we have to start, asking when that's going to happen. The collapse of the Ukrainian army. And I hope that this collapse comes sooner rather than later. Not because I have some gleeful joy at watching Ukrainians get beat, but two things. The more reality hits home in Vilnius, the less likely it is stupid will win out. I'd rather have NATO trying to figure out how to adapt to the certainty of a Russian victory than NATO believing that if they change the chess game into something else, that they have a chance of winning, because they don't. All they have to do is have a chance of provoking a nuclear conflict. And that's something else that people need to reflect on. All the people that wish, I think, one of the best case scenarios that's being painted by people is what they call the frozen conflict. I think there's a growing recognition that Ukraine isn't going to win this war. Ukraine isn't going to achieve a breakthrough. What they want is for Ukraine to freeze the Russians in place and then grind Russia down with relentless warfare so that over time, Russia weakens to the point that it loses its will or resolve to resist. And then Ukraine might be able to win back territories. But the winning back of territories means that Russia's losing territory that constitutionally is part of Russia. That is an existential threat to the survival of Russia. And Russia said, we will use nuclear weapons to prevent that. So those who say we want a frozen war, what you're saying is you want a nuclear war with Russia. And there's people in Russia right now that are looking at that saying, yep, that's exactly what you're saying. You want a nuclear war with Russia. So if that's what you want, is it in Russia's best interest to wait until that happens, let the frozen war come out? Or if it appears that we're transitioning into a frozen war, why don't we preempt it? Why don't we, Russia, adopt a nuclear posture of preemption? So when it becomes clear that the United States and NATO, together with Ukraine, have embarked on a frozen war policy designed to weaken us, we preempt it by nuking them. And in the article that the gentleman wrote, Sergei Karaganov, he put out Poznan, Poland, as the target city. He said, we'll pop Poland. And then the question is, will the American president be willing to trade Boston for Poznan? And they brought up Boston just as a hypothetical city. But the idea is that if the United States was to respond, that it would lose an American city. And then we begin a general nuclear war and everybody dies. And that's the direction we're heading right now. We're heading in that direction because Ukraine can't win this war. And so the next best option for NATO is the frozen war, or some sort of, changing the game. It's no longer going to be chess. It's going to be checkers, or it's going to be, what's that cool game with dice that you move things around?
How about Sorry? That's a game that I used to play when I was a kid. I think that's pretty appropriate. Well, let me ask you one more thing. And I think this is I want to hear. I like Andrei Martyanov, and you and I have, talked with him on a number of occasions. One of the things that he says about this conflict period, and that is about conflict period. Look, when we hear the HIMARS are the latest wonder weapon, when we hear, oh, they blew up the Ukrainian took, 100 meters over here and, 2 kilometers over there, right? War is not won on the tactical level. It's won on the strategic level. Explain that and how that is, how that dynamic is playing itself out in this conflict.
Sure. I mean, let's look at something that maybe people will understand who are watching. HBO had a great series, Band of Brothers. It told the story of the 101st Airborne Division, unit, and you see them fighting in Normandy and all that, but then they jump into the Netherlands as part of Operation Market Garden, and there's this one episode where the Germans counterattack, and the Americans have to retreat, and and retreat is never pretty. It's always ugly, and these guys are retreating. And the paratroopers are in the back of the thing saying, "This sucks. Retreating sucks." It does. And if all you saw was that, you'd say, "Holy cow, the Americans are beat. Americans are getting beat." But they're not getting beat. The Germans had a good day. The Germans were able, at a point in time, to gain a tactical advantage, and a smart military commander, confronting the fact that we have lost a tactical advantage, instead of suffering, an inordinate amount of casualties, will withdraw, regroup, and seek to transform the battlefield to his tactical advantage, to counterattack and to push the Germans back, which is exactly what happened later on. So people need to understand right now that not only is there's a lot of fighting taking place on a very large, expansive battlefield. I don't think people truly understand the scope and scale of this conflict. We look at little maps, but we don't realize how big that is. Anybody who's traveled in Europe and done the driving, just go ahead on the map and look at the distance between Paris and Berlin, and then juxtapose that onto a map of where the fighting is. You're like, whoa, It's a lot of territory. This is huge. What's going on here? This is a lot of fighting. So understand that even as competent as the Russians are, that the Ukrainians are capable of achieving a tactical advantage at certain points on the map. And they've counterattacked and they've taken a ridge. They've counterattacked and they've taken a tree line. They've taken a village or a house. And of course, the Ukrainians, being the experts at propaganda they are, take the selfies and they put the film up there. But what they don't show is that the Russian high command saying, "Okay, we lost a village here. All right, bring in the Fab 500s. Pop, pop. Bring in the TOS 1 or TOS 2 flamethrower systems. Let's get them with artillery." And suddenly the Ukrainians are all dead, wounded, retreating, and the Russians take back up. Because, see, the Russians have the ability to withdraw, collect their forces, counterattack. When the Ukrainians take a village, they've expended everything they have. There's nothing left. The people that are left are going, "Man, we dodged that bullet. We're digging in. Boom, now we all die. We're retreating again." The Ukrainians have yet to be able to exploit any tactical success. And so while it plays well on Telegram in isolation, it's repeated over and over again in the Western media. I mean, the British press every day, if you read them, man, the Ukrainians should be in Moscow by now because they're one in every battle. It doesn't work that way. War is very complicated, dangerous business. Let's again reflect on Vladimir Putin when he talked about the conflict, the Ukrainian counteroffensive. He said that Russia was enjoying a 10-1 advantage, in terms of casualties. So that means that if you killed 13,000 Ukrainians, which at the time he spoke, that was the number, that means you lost 1,300 Russians. That's a big number, people. It's a huge number. Coming up with how you lose 1,300 men in combat is mind-boggling. There are battles that we fought in World War II where we didn't lose that many men. And yet these are battles that are considered to be massive battles, fighting, etc. 1,300 dead. That means that the Ukrainians are landing blows. That means there are occasions when Ukrainian tanks will roll up to a Russian trench line and kill, 20 guys in the trench line because the Russians are having a bad day. The Ukrainians got the tactical advantage. There'll be a time when a Storm Shadow missile will get through the air defense and hit a command post and take out a bunch of guys. They'll hit an ammunition dump. They'll do this. That's war. 1,300 Russians. It takes a lot to kill that many people. And that's with a 10-1 advantage. There might be days where the Russians don't get the 10-1 advantage. There might be a day where the Russians are going to get the 1-3 advantage, which means if you kill 10,000 Ukrainians, you're losing 3,000 guys. War is hell. And there's a lot of guys dying on both sides. It just happens that more Ukrainians are dying. But the notion that Russia, isn't taking casualties is absurd. They're taking heavy casualties, not as heavy as Ukrainians, but this is backbreaking what's happening to Russia. Backbreaking. It would destroy us. Could you imagine the American people 2.5 weeks into a military engagement having 1,300 body bags show up at Dover? Come on, America, chew on that for a minute. And that's the best that's going to happen. The bad day is when you're going to have 13,000 body bags show up at Dover, because General Cavoli warned everybody about this. He said the scope and scale of the violence. He's the commander of Allied forces in Europe, 4-star general, American general. And in January, he spoke to a defense forum in Sweden, said the scope and scale of the violence is beyond the imagination of NATO. That means that NATO can't comprehend what's happening. They're not trained for this. They're not organized for this. They're not ready for this. And if they ever to get into it, the casualties would be prohibitive. No Western society today can sustain that, which is why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, people need to understand. I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, Garland. You know that. I try to be very well grounded, but George Soros, who's everybody's boogeyman, back in 1993 wrote an article where he talked about the future of NATO, and he said it's imperative that if NATO is going to, confront Russia, that we don't get in a situation where NATO body bags come home, because that'll break the will of NATO to want to continue the fight. So what NATO needs is to find the nexus between Eastern European manpower and NATO technology, to marry NATO technology up with Eastern European manpower and use this as the mechanism to inflict pain on Russia. And you don't get a better definition of what's happening today on the ground in Ukraine than marrying Eastern European manpower with NATO technology for the purpose of bringing pain to Russia. That's exactly what's happening today. It's not that he didn't say to defeat Russia, to bring pain to Russia. That's all this is about. 1,300 body bags going, or they don't use body bag, going back in zinc coffins. That's bringing pain to Russia. This is a sick way of thinking, but that's what NATO's doing. And that's what people need to cut through. All this BS about we're supporting democracy. It's a dictatorship, martial law. There's no democracy there. We're supporting, freedom loving. They're Nazis, and we care for the Ukrainian people. No, you don't, because you're allowing this sick system of marrying Eastern European meat with Western steel to send Russian boys home in zinc coffins. That's what this is all about. And it's not going to work, because you can't bring enough pain on Russia to beat them. Any nation that's willing to absorb or capable of absorbing 27 million dead and not forgetting about that. And these troops in the trenches, they're honest to God looking up and seeing their grandfathers or great grandfathers looking down on them. And they're like, we're not going to betray you, boss. We know what you did. We know the sacrifice you made. We're not going to betray you. You can't bring enough pain to that kind of people. So not only are we condemning the Ukrainians to destruction, but we're doing it in a cause we know they can't win. Any rational person knows they can't win. So we're simply sacrificing their lives. And that's the ultimate tragedy of this whole thing, is that you can't even say these Ukrainians are dying in a worthy cause, that their sacrifice means something. Their sacrifice means absolutely nothing. And shame on the West for allowing this to happen. Shame on the West for creating an environment where we can rationalize the humanity of marrying East European manpower to Western NATO technology. This is sick. This is criminal level sickness.
Human sacrifice. We talk about human sacrifice 1,000 years ago. This is human sacrifice today. It's the same exact thing to me.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to jump over to, for the last 20 minutes or so, we're going to jump over to Rockfin. As I said, everyone, my Rockfin, you can join Rockfin, doesn't cost anything, become a member. Please, everybody do that, just in case they toss me off of YouTube. And also Rockfin's a great platform for those of you who want to be subscribers, who can afford it, if you can afford it. $14.99 a month, or join for 1 year. It's about 12 something, because they knock a couple months off. Scott and I are going to finish the next 20 minutes or so for our Rockfin subscribers only. So let's drop here. We're getting off.